I spent years convinced men were the problem, right up until one phone call made me realize the common denominator in every disaster was me. Be me. 32 and tired in a way that doesn't show up in blood panels or sleep trackers. The kind of tired you earn from spending years convincing yourself that vigilance is the same thing as safety. I work as a project manager at a mid-sized tech company, which sounds impressive until you watch me sitting in the break room at 7:58 every morning pretending I enjoy the taste of industrial-grade coffee. My life is a straight line: condo, commute, meetings, deliverables, grocery store, spotless living room, doom scrolling, sleep. People think straight lines are stable. Really, they're just flat. And I've been flat for a while. My friends call me hypercompetent, which is their polite way of saying I don't let anyone get close enough to disappoint me. I treat emotional life the same way I treat Jira: strict permissions, limited access, and absolutely no one gets admin rights except me. It works well enough, if you ignore the echo you hear in your own condo sometimes. I tell myself it's independence. Strong boundaries. Elevated self-respect. The usual slogans that keep adults functioning long after they should have paused to reassess. Dating is, well, it's a lab experiment I keep running with the same failed variables. Men walk in with that faint optimism that says they think they might be the exception. 10 minutes later, they're realizing I'm not auditioning them for companionship. I'm stress testing them for ideological faults like I'm waiting for an earthquake. There was this one date a couple months back: Caleb, finance guy, sharp suit, the kind of smile that comes with a subscription to a gym he doesn't use. We're at this bar that tries way too hard with exposed bulbs and brick walls someone probably aged with a blowtorch. He's glowing over some deal he just closed. Proud of it in that uncomplicated way men have when they've done something they think is impressive. I listen, sip my drink, tilt my head, and ask if it ever gets exhausting turning the world into numbers to exploit. The look on his face was almost funny. Something in him dimmed, like I'd flicked off a switch he didn't know was visible. The conversation sagged. He started checking his phone. By minute 35, he muttered something about an early morning meeting, tossed cash on the table, and disappeared so fast I wondered if he'd sprinted. I went home half annoyed, half smug. I told myself it proved my point: men don't actually want real conversations, just applause. But if I was honest, the taxi ride home felt weirdly hollow, like I'd won an argument I'd never actually wanted to have. My social media didn't help. It was a curated museum of outrage: threads dragging men for existing, reposts about microaggressions, captions written like legal briefs for crimes no one committed. People hyped me in the comments. Queen behavior. Hold them accountable. Drag him. It felt like being celebrated for swinging a hammer at everything that moved. And sure, the engagement was nice in the moment, but I usually posted them while sitting alone on my couch with the dishwasher humming in the background like a pitying sigh. Work wasn't much better. Every interaction became a diagnostic exam I didn't remember signing up to give. Adrian from marketing repeated an idea. Heapiating. Felix explained back-end logic a little too thoroughly. Mansplaining. Mr. Lopez held the door for me every morning with this tired, gentle smile. Benevolent sexism. I could practically hear myself attaching labels like I was tagging wildlife. The effect was predictable: men around me shifted into this careful, brittle politeness, as if they were waiting for alarms to go off. They spoke less. Looked at me less. Stayed out of my way entirely in meetings. I told myself I preferred it that way. Except it made the office feel like a museum exhibit: woman who cannot be approached. The temperature in the room changed when I walked in. You'd be amazed how lonely power feels when no one's actually giving it to you. It was distance masquerading as respect. And I'd built it myself without noticing. Things weren't bad in the dramatic sense, they were just off. A slow drift. The kind you don't feel until you look up and realize everyone's a few feet farther from you than they used to be. I could pretend it didn't bother me most days. But sometimes, on the quieter nights, I'd catch my reflection in the dark TV screen and wonder when exactly I'd decided that distrust was somehow a virtue. Other people were making connections. Meanwhile, I was running a one-woman audit of the male population and wondering why it felt so draining. I didn't know it then, but I was basically circling the drain. I just hadn't heard the sound yet. The sound finally came during a phone call I wasn't prepared for. Julian, my oldest friend, practically a brother at this point, the one person who's known me long enough to recognize my moods by the way I inhale, called while I was reorganizing my bookshelves for the third time that week. He works as a psychologist now, which means he has this infuriating talent for listening without interrupting, like he's taking notes on my soul. He asked how things were. I should have lied, but exhaustion makes honesty slip through the cracks. I unloaded about Caleb, about men at work, about how every conversation lately felt like an obstacle course of low expectations and emotional incompetence. I talked for 10 straight minutes, pacing my living room like I was testifying in court. I could hear my own voice stretching thin, full of the same rehearsed irritations I'd been repeating for years. It felt automatic, like muscle memory. When I finally stopped, there was this long, irritating silence on his end. I thought the call dropped. It hadn't. He sighed, not loudly, just in that way that meant he was about to ruin my night, and said, "Renee, are you actually happy?" The question hit harder than I expected. I froze with a book halfway back on the shelf, fingers gripping the spine like it might steady me. My first instinct was to deflect. Then argue. Then defend my ideology like it was a friend he'd insulted. But nothing came out. My throat just closed around whatever answer I thought I had. Julian didn't rush. He never does. He spoke gently, like he was trying not to startle an animal. He said it sounded like I'd built a worldview designed to protect me from disappointment, but instead it had just fenced me off from everyone. That I'd spent so long practicing criticism that I'd forgotten how to connect. He told me he'd watched me drift into this pattern for years, misinterpreting, anticipating harm, treating suspicion as strategy, and that it obviously wasn't giving me the life I wanted. I hated how much it made sense. I hated that it came from him. And I really hated how quiet the apartment felt while he talked, like the walls were agreeing with him. He suggested something that, at the time, sounded like psychological waterboarding: try 30 days without criticizing men. No corrections. No lectures. No microaggression audits. Not out loud. Not internally. I laughed because I thought he was kidding. He wasn't. And, he added, twisting the knife, for every meaningful interaction with a man, you give one genuine compliment. I stood there, stunned, like he'd asked me to fly to the moon with a tote bag and a granola bar. It felt impossible. Irrational. Almost insulting. A month without calling out anything? A month without my entire operating system? But I couldn't let him think he'd cornered me with a good point. I said fine. I'd do it. I'd prove that men were the problem and no amount of niceness on my part would change anything. It was petty, and I knew it. But pettiness is underrated as a motivator. The next morning, I woke up already annoyed at the experiment. My brain kept trying to prepare its usual arsenal of critiques like a dog pacing by the door waiting for someone to grab the leash. I got dressed, grabbed my bag, and walked to the coffee shop where the barista, a kid who looked barely old enough to rent a car, was already bracing himself for my order. He was always nervous around me, probably because I once challenged him over a lukewarm latte. Not my proudest moment. But today I had to start the stupid experiment, so when he handed me my drink, I forced myself to say, "You're really fast at this." "Thanks." He blinked. Then he actually smiled. Small, but real. He said, "Thanks, and fumbled the lid like he'd short-circuited. I walked out feeling weirdly guilty, like I'd accidentally kicked over a sandcastle someone worked hard on. Then something even stranger happened. He remembered my order the next day. Then the next. Then he started drawing crooked hearts in the foam like he didn't know what else to do with the sudden shift in my energy. It threw me off so much that I spent the entire elevator ride to my office staring at the cup like it was mocking me. At work, I held the lobby door for Mr. Lopez before he could hold it for me, and when he looked surprised, I said, "You make this place feel safe in the mornings. I appreciate it." He straightened up like someone had handed him a medal. The pride in his face was so pure it almost made me uncomfortable. Then there was Adrian in marketing. He walked in wearing this sharp navy blazer, clearly a new one, and for the first time, instead of scrutinizing him for hidden sexism, I said, "Nice jacket. It suits you." He froze. Actually froze. Then he muttered something about grabbing coffee and disappeared, returning 10 minutes later with a cup for me too. He set it on my desk like he wasn't sure if it would detonate. Every interaction felt like I'd wandered into a parallel universe where men weren't guarded, irritated, or defensive, they were just responding to me. To the absence of hostility. To the presence of something human. And the worst part? The results were undeniable. Which meant one horrifying thing. Maybe it wasn't the universe that needed recalibrating. Maybe it was me. Felix was the turning point. Of all people, it had to be him. Quiet back-end engineer, the kind who speaks in database metaphors and keeps granola bars in his desk like he's preparing for an earthquake no one else felt. I'd always assumed he avoided me because he was intimidated. In hindsight, he was probably just tired of dodging the crossfire I kept loaded. We were in a meeting about the new deployment timeline, the kind where everyone looks half alive and mildly afraid of me. Felix explained a fix he'd made to a recurring data sync issue. Normally I would have dissected it for tone or phrasing, but my 30-day agreement was in full effect and I was already exhausted from resisting every reflex my brain had on autopilot. So instead, when he finished, I said the wildest sentence I'd uttered in years, that was actually a brilliant workaround. Nicely done. The room went quiet in a way that made my skin prickle. Felix's entire posture changed, shoulders up, eyes brighter, like someone had finally turned him back on. He launched into follow-up ideas, suddenly confident, articulate, and engaged. It was like watching a plant that had been living under a rock suddenly get sunlight and remember it's supposed to grow. The meeting ran smoother than it had in months. No tension. No defensiveness. No one measuring their words like they were stepping over tripwires I'd scattered. By the time I got home that night, something in me felt off-kilter, like a picture frame hanging crooked. I opened my laptop out of habit and scrolled through my old posts, the callouts, the rants, the posturing. All that brittle noise. I stared at it long enough for the truth to settle in one disturbing piece at a time. It didn't make me powerful. It made me lonely. It made everyone else feel unwelcome. It made every room colder than it needed to be. I didn't break down dramatically. I just sat there with this dull ache building in my chest, like the kind you get when you finally look at something you've avoided for years. Then the tears came, slow and steady, not the cinematic kind, just tired ones. The kind that happen when you realize the person you've been defending isn't the person you want to be. I deleted everything. Not out of shame. More like clearing out the attic of a house I no longer lived in. The following weeks felt unnervingly calm. People at work relaxed around me. Projects actually moved faster because I wasn't fighting the air around every conversation. Felix became enthusiastic, even funny. Adrian brought me coffee without looking like he was performing a hostage exchange. The office didn't feel like enemy territory anymore. It felt normal. I didn't know what to do with normal. Then came Grant. Architect. Soft-spoken. Hands that moved like he thought about what they were doing. We met through a friend who insisted I try something new, which at the time felt like punishment. I walked into the date ready to endure it. But somewhere between him describing a building he loved and me trying not to analyze the political implications of foundation design, I found one small, sincere thing to praise: you explain things in a way that makes them sound meaningful. It was simple. Barely a compliment, really. But his entire demeanor shifted, not in the weird, performative way men sometimes react, but in this open, unguarded way that made me feel like someone had cracked a window I didn't realize was sealed shut. The date didn't turn into fireworks. It turned into a conversation. A real one. The kind where you forget to check your phone and accidentally let someone see you thinking. We kept seeing each other. Slowly. Quietly. Not because I felt obligated to prove something, but because I didn't feel exhausted around him. That was new. The final confrontation wasn't with a person. It was with myself. One night I deleted my old saved drafts, the ones written in that clipped, self-righteous tone I used to mistake for clarity. It felt strangely ceremonial, like setting down a shield that had gotten too heavy to carry. I called Julian. He answered on the first ring. I told him the experiment worked. I hated saying it, but it felt honest in a way nothing else had in a long time. He didn't gloat. He just said he was glad I finally sounded like myself again. My life didn't transform into some glossy inspirational montage. It just lightened. Meetings went smoother. My stress leveled out. I stopped scanning every interaction for invisible threats. Grant and I kept building something that didn't feel like a negotiation or a test. I'm not fixed. I didn't become some beacon of emotional enlightenment. I'm just 32, finally willing to stop bracing for impact every time a man speaks. It's quieter this way. Easier to breathe. And maybe that's enough.